There are moments in television history that seem almost sacred, memories that once defined an era, families, and entire generations. For millions of viewers across America, The Cosby Show was one of those moments. And at the heart of that picture-perfect family stood Phylicia Rashad, graceful, eloquent, unshakably dignified. She wasn't just an actress playing a mother. She became the image of intelligence, love, and quiet power. But behind that luminous smile, the story of Rashad, and the show that made her a legend, was far more complicated than most fans ever realized. Her journey carried triumph and tragedy in equal measure, and as time revealed the painful truth behind the show's creator, the world that once adored her began to fracture. Phylicia Rashad was born in 1948 in Houston, Texas, into a family where brilliance wasn't optional, it was expected. Her mother, Vivian Ayers, was a Pulitzer Prize-nominated poet and playwright. Her father, Andrew Allen, a respected orthodontist. The household pulsed with intellect, discipline, and artistic ambition. But beneath that refinement was the weight of an America divided by race, a reality the Rashad children could never ignore. When Phylicia was still young, her family moved to Mexico to escape the cruelty of segregation in the South. There, she experienced a world where the color of her skin no longer defined her worth. The Spanish language came naturally to her, but what she absorbed even deeper was a sense of freedom, a kind of liberation that would later shape her performances with a quiet defiance. She graduated from Howard University in 1970, earning a degree in theater with honors magna cum laude. It wasn't just an education, it was a declaration. At Howard, a historic institution for Black excellence, Rashad learned to merge intellect with artistry, to see performance not as entertainment, but as responsibility. Her path was never easy. The stages of Broadway were rarely welcoming to Black women in the 1970s, yet she carved her name among them. Phylicia Allen, as she was known then, became a steady presence in the New York theater scene, taking on both musicals and Shakespearean plays. Her performances weren't flamboyant. They were precise, layered with grace and authority. It was during these formative years that she built her reputation not only as a gifted actress, but as a woman of immense self-control. Every movement, every line she delivered carried restraint, as if she already knew that the world was watching, ready to misinterpret any moment of weakness. By the time she changed her name to Phylicia Rashad, after marrying NFL star Ahmad Rashad, she had already become more than an actress. She was an embodiment of quiet resistance, a reflection of poise forged through pain and perseverance. By the early 1980s, Phylicia Rashad had already earned respect on Broadway. Yet television was a different world, one she hadn't fully stepped into. When the offer for The Cosby Show came, it wasn't just another acting opportunity. It was a gamble that would redefine American television. At the time, portrayals of Black families on TV were often one-dimensional, built on stereotypes of struggle, chaos, or poverty. Bill Cosby wanted to change that. He envisioned a series that would reflect the dignity, intelligence, and stability of Black middle-class life. The concept was revolutionary. A doctor, a lawyer, and their children, all African-American, all thriving. When Rashad auditioned for the role of Clare Huxtable, the script originally described her as a stay-at-home mother. But the moment she entered the room, that vision changed. Her presence, composed, articulate, and commanding, made it impossible to imagine her character without a career of her own. Cosby saw that instantly. Within days, Clare Huxtable became an attorney, and the entire dynamic of the show shifted around her. What Rashad brought to the screen wasn't just elegance, it was balance. She wasn't soft-spoken for the sake of humility, nor forceful for attention. Instead, she radiated an inner strength that made her both authoritative and compassionate. Viewers didn't just see a mother, they saw a woman who worked, who reasoned, who demanded respect without ever raising her voice. When The Cosby Show premiered in 1984, It became a cultural phenomenon almost overnight. Ratings soared. Critics praised it as a landmark in representation, and families across America, of every race, tuned in to watch the Huxtables every week. For 8 years, Rashad's portrayal of Clare became synonymous with the idea of the perfect mother, though her perfection was rooted not in fantasy, but in discipline, warmth, and intellect. Behind the camera, however, Rashad approached her role with the same seriousness she had learned from the stage. She studied scripts meticulously, insisted on emotional truth, and often reminded younger cast members that they were doing something historic. But even as success surrounded her, there was a quiet burden growing. The Cosby Show was not just entertainment. It became a symbol of progress for an entire community, and symbols carry weight. Rashad understood that with every scene she filmed, she wasn't just representing herself, but millions of women who had never seen themselves portrayed with such grace and power. And in that sense, what looked like a dream come true was also the beginning of a lifelong responsibility, one that would become increasingly difficult to bear as the years went on. For nearly a decade, The Cosby Show dominated American television. It wasn't merely a sitcom anymore, it was a movement. And at the center of that cultural shift stood Phylicia Rashad, whose portrayal of Clare Huxtable transcended fiction. She became a living representation of what many families aspired to be: calm under pressure, fiercely intelligent, nurturing but never submissive. Week after week, audiences saw a different kind of motherhood, one that didn't sacrifice intellect for warmth or ambition for family. Rashad's performance gave millions of women permission to believe that they could be both successful and tender, authoritative, yet loving. For Black women especially, Clare Huxtable was revolutionary. She shattered stereotypes that had persisted for generations: the overworked matriarch, the absent mother, the angry Black woman. Instead, she embodied precision, education, and grace. Rashad's choices were subtle but powerful. Her voice rarely rose in anger. Her expressions carried quiet confidence. When she spoke to her on-screen children, there was discipline, but also respect. The Huxtable household became a reflection of a new social reality, one where Black excellence wasn't the exception but the standard. Beyond entertainment, the show had measurable cultural impact. In the mid to late 1980s, enrollment at historically Black colleges and universities surged, a phenomenon many scholars credited to the influence of The Cosby Show and its spin-off, A Different World. Suddenly, higher education became a tangible dream for young Black Americans. Families saw themselves represented not as victims, but as achievers. But for Rashad, the success carried a quiet irony. While millions admired Clare Huxtable's perfect balance, the actress behind her felt the constant pressure to become that image: flawless, composed, and morally unshakable. Publicly, she was celebrated as America's mother. Privately, she knew that no woman could live up to the ideal she had created. And yet, Rashad accepted that responsibility with humility. She often described her role as a kind of stewardship, a duty to portray women of color with dignity and depth. She wasn't just performing, she was protecting an image, defending a legacy that extended beyond the script. By 1992, when The Cosby Show ended, it left behind more than laughter. It left behind an entire vision of what America could be: integrated, educated, united through family values. For Rashad, those years defined her career, but they also bound her to a story she could never fully escape. Because once you become the face of a dream, the world rarely allows you to step out of it, even when the dream begins to break. For over 2 decades after The Cosby Show ended, its legacy remained untarnished, a permanent symbol of family, unity, and aspiration. But in 2014, the illusion began to crack. News outlets started resurfacing decades-old allegations against Bill Cosby, the man who had once been hailed as America's dad. What began as whispers quickly became a tidal wave of accusations. Women from across the country came forward, claiming they had been drugged and assaulted by Cosby, some incidents tracing back to the 1960s. The revelations hit Hollywood like a storm. Suddenly, the man who had created a show about moral integrity was exposed as someone very different behind closed doors. Networks pulled The Cosby Show reruns from syndication, companies cut ties, and public opinion turned almost overnight. For millions of fans, it wasn't just the fall of a celebrity. It felt like the betrayal of a belief. And in the midst of this chaos stood Phylicia Rashad. For years, she had defended the values of The Cosby Show: education, respect, family, and strength. Now, those same values were being questioned because of the man who helped build them. Rashad's connection to Cosby was undeniable. He wasn't just a co-star, but a creative partner and longtime friend. When reporters asked for her reaction, her response stunned many. She refused to condemn him. In one interview, Rashad described the scandal as the destruction of a legacy. She suggested that the accusations were orchestrated to erase Cosby's contributions to black culture. Her words, spoken with loyalty, ignited controversy. For some, they were seen as misguided defense. For others, they revealed the painful complexity of standing by someone you once trusted. The fallout was brutal. Fans who had once adored her felt conflicted. Critics accused her of ignoring victims' pain. Universities and public institutions distanced themselves from the show's legacy. The cultural symbol that once united America now divided it sharply, between those who wanted to preserve its art and those who couldn't separate it from its creator's sins. When Cosby was convicted in 2018 and later released in 2021 after his verdict was overturned, Rashad's support for him reignited the public debate. As Dean of the College of Fine Arts at Howard University, her comments drew outrage from students and faculty. Petitions circulated demanding her resignation. She issued an apology, brief, measured, but without withdrawal of her stance. It was the darkest chapter in her career, not because she had committed a crime, but because her silence, her faith, and her loyalty collided with a world that no longer tolerated ambiguity. The show that had once stood for moral clarity now existed under a shadow. And Rashad, once the heart of it, became its most complicated survivor. By the time Phylicia Rashad stepped into her new role as Dean of the College of Fine Arts at Howard University in 2021, the world she had once known was gone. The laughter of The Cosby Show had faded into uneasy silence, replaced by questions about morality, loyalty, and truth. Yet in that silence, Rashad chose not to retreat. She returned to what had always anchored her: art, education, and the belief that stories could still heal. For many, her appointment was a moment of triumph. After decades of representing grace on screen, she was now guiding a new generation of artists toward integrity and purpose. But beneath the applause, controversy lingered. Her public support of Bill Cosby resurfaced almost immediately after his release from prison, when she tweeted words of celebration, a moment of joy that the world saw as insensitivity. The backlash was swift and merciless. Students protested. Alumni demanded accountability. Rashad apologized, promising to listen and learn. It was a strange irony. The woman who had once symbolized moral authority now found herself being taught lessons about empathy, timing, and the changing language of justice. But Rashad didn't run from it. She faced the criticism with the same composure that had defined her character decades earlier. In interviews that followed, she spoke with honesty, though always carefully. She admitted that her bond with Cosby was born from years of shared art, not ignorance of pain. She said she believed in due process, in complexity, even when the world preferred simple villains and simple heroes. Her words didn't erase the controversy, but they revealed a truth about her, that she was human, shaped by loyalty, burdened by history, and still searching for clarity in a fractured legacy. As time passed, Rashad returned to the stage. Her performances in Between the World and Me and This Is Us reminded audiences of her quiet power, that measured voice, that stillness, that ability to make silence feel sacred. She was no longer America's mother. She was something deeper, a woman who had lived through the rise and fall of an ideal and who still carried its weight with grace. Today, when people mention The Cosby Show, they do so with conflicted hearts. But Phylicia Rashad remains, not untouched, but unbroken. The tragedy of her story is not that she lost faith in others, but that she refused to lose faith in the idea that people, even flawed ones, could still be redeemed through art, memory, and truth. Because sometimes survival isn't about defending the past. It's about carrying what's left of it with dignity and daring to keep telling the story, even when it hurts. In the end, Phylicia Rashad's story isn't just about fame or controversy. It's about what it means to live with the weight of loyalty. She was the face of elegance and warmth in The Cosby Show, a woman who made millions believe that love, intelligence, and humor could hold a family together. But behind that legacy lies the quiet ache of contradiction, the pain of standing by someone the world has condemned, the loneliness of being misunderstood for choosing compassion over condemnation. Rashad's journey reminds us that even icons are fragile, that the people we place on pedestals also stumble under the gravity of history. Yet through it all, she has never stopped creating, teaching, or believing in the power of art to restore what the world tries to break. Today, her name carries both admiration and unease. And maybe that's the price of honesty in a culture that often demands perfection. Because sometimes, grace isn't about being right. It's about standing in the storm, quietly, defiantly, and refusing to let bitterness define who you are. So perhaps the question isn't what Phylicia Rashad should have done, but what we might have done if we were in her place, torn between love, truth, and the memory of who someone once was.